My name was Cassian Vex, and I've been listening to the same 3 hours and 17 minutes for 42 years. Not by choice. Not anymore. The Vox recording loops in my mind whether I sleep or wake, whether I close my eyes or stare into the void. Every scream, every plea, every moment of that shelter's final transmission plays on repeat in the meat of my brain, carved so deep into my neurons that I've become less a man and more a living archive of horror. They call it VOX 44 Tertius in the official Administratum records. Motivational material for frontline personnel, the designation reads. The brass distributes it to guard regiments across 3 sectors as a reminder of what we're fighting against. What happens when we fail. But I knew it differently. I knew the voices before they became screams. I knew the shelter before it became a tomb. I knew the world before the greenskins turned it into an abattoir. I was there when the recording started. I'm still there now, trapped in those 3 hours and 17 minutes, listening to what I couldn't stop. Listening forever. But let me rewind. Let me take you back to Boros Tertius, to the moment I became the man who recorded humanity's extinction, one shelter at a time. Let me tell you how I became a witness to hell, and how hell never lets its witnesses leave. I was 27 standard Terran years old when Boros Tertius died. 27, and already exhausted by the Imperium's endless demands. I'd served as a Vox operator for the Boros Tertius Planetary Defense Force for 9 years. Since I was 18, since my father died at his factory station, and I needed to avoid being declared unproductive and sent to the corpse starch processing plants. The PDF wasn't glamorous. We weren't proper Imperial Guard, just local defense forces, under-equipped and under-trained, tasked with keeping order on a hive world of 8 billion souls crammed into 3 massive hive cities. Our equipment was 3rd-generation hand-me-downs. Our training was 2 weeks of drill and a pamphlet titled The Emperor's Protection, a Soldier's Primer. They told us the Emperor protects those who serve with courage and faith. They made us recite the litanies every morning before our shifts, made us believe our service had meaning beyond filling a uniform. I tried to believe it. My father had believed it, believed that working yourself to death in a munitions factory was noble service. I'd inherited his faith along with his HAB unit debt. My station was Hive Tertius, Sub-Level 47, Communications Hub 12. A cramped room filled with Vox equipment dating back at least 2 centuries, surrounded by ferrocrete walls, painted the same institutional gray as every other Imperial structure. My job was simple. Monitor civilian emergency frequencies, coordinate PDF response to disturbances, keep the population calm. Keep them believing the lies. Keep them obedient. I shared the station with 3 others. Corporal Matthias Kane, a grizzled veteran of 20 years who drank cleaning solution when he thought we weren't looking. Private Lyron Wells, barely 19, who still believed in the Imperial propaganda. And my brother, Private Davin Vex, 23 years old, who joined the PDF because I was there and someone needed to watch my back. Davin was the only family I had left. Our father, his name was Gregor Vex, had died when Davin was 15 and I was 19. Crushed between 2 cargo loaders in Factory District 7, his body rendered into an unrecognizable mass of broken bones and pulped flesh. The Administratum sent us a notice that his remains would be converted to corpse starch to fulfill his final service to the Imperium, and that we owed 14 months' worth of HAB unit fees his death hadn't settled. I remembered my father best by his hands, thick, scarred hands that smelled of promethium and metal shavings, hands that had held mine when I was small, when the Hive's industrial roar frightened me during sleep cycle. "The noise means we're productive," he'd said. "The Emperor sees our work. We matter because we serve." He'd believed that until a mechanical failure turned him into protein paste. I tried to keep believing it after. Tried to find meaning in wearing the PDF uniform, monitoring Vox channels, keeping 8 billion people from realizing how fragile their existence was. The lies got easier to tell when you told them to yourself first. The warning started 17 days before Boros Tertius fell. Not official warnings. The administratum didn't believe in causing panic, but we heard things on the long-range military frequencies. Fragmentary reports from agricultural worlds in the outer system. Distress calls cut short. A single Vox transmission from Agri-World Secundus that lasted 9 seconds. Screaming, the sound of something massive tearing through metal, then a voice in a language that sounded like violence itself. Then nothing. Just static. Corporal Kane had monitoring duty that night. I found him at his station the next morning, staring at the Vox receiver like it had betrayed him. "Something's in the system," he said without preamble. His hands were shaking. "Something big. The Navy's gone silent. The astropathic choir went dark 6 hours ago. We're alone." "The Navy doesn't go silent," Lyron said, young and certain. "They're probably just enforcing Vox discipline. Standard procedure during—" "The astropaths don't go dark," Kane interrupted. His voice was flat. "Dead. They're the Emperor's voice. If they're silent, it's because something killed them. Or worse." I wanted to dismiss it. Wanted to believe Kane was just paranoid, that his years of service had worn him down to paranoia and chemical dependency. But I'd heard those fragmentary transmissions. I'd heard the screaming. "What do we do?" Davin asked, looking at me, always looking at me for answers I didn't have. "We follow protocol," I said. "Monitor frequencies, report anything unusual to command, keep the civilians calm." "And if command doesn't answer?" Kane asked. I didn't have a response to that. Command stopped answering on day 12. The first we knew of the invasion was the seismic sensors. Massive impacts in the wastes beyond Hive Primus, hundreds of kilometers from our position in Hive Tertius. The administratum initially reported meteor strikes, natural phenomena, nothing to concern the population. Then the impacts started accelerating. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of objects striking Boros Tertius's surface with enough force to register on seismographs across the planet. "That's not meteors," Kane said, watching the readouts. "That's an orbital assault." He was right. The objects were drop pods, crude, brutal things that hit the surface at terminal velocity, cracking open to disgorge their contents. We didn't know what was inside, not until the first visual reports came through from PDF units in the northern wastes. The reports were incoherent, screaming about green-skinned monsters the size of industrial machinery, about crude weapons that tore through armor like it was paper, about how many there were, millions of them, a tide of violence that swept across the wastes toward the Hive cities. Orcs. A war had found Boros Tertius. The PDF command tried to mount a defense, tried to evacuate the lower Hive levels, consolidate the population in the reinforced shelters, buy time for an Imperial Guard response. But there was no Guard response. No Navy bombardment, no Space Marine intervention. The system's defenses had been overwhelmed or destroyed. We were 8 billion people facing a Xenos invasion with no hope of rescue. The priests told the population that the Emperor watches over the faithful, that prayer and courage would see us through, that our suffering had meaning in his grand design. I watched the tactical displays showing the green tide advancing and knew those were lies told to keep people from tearing each other apart in panic. But we repeated the lies anyway, because the alternative was admitting we were already dead. The evacuation protocols activated on day 14. 8 billion people trying to reach shelters designed for maybe 2 billion. The Hebstacks emptied like punctured bladders, humanity flooding through corridors and transit tunnels in desperate waves. The PDF tried to maintain order. We failed within hours. I stayed at my station, monitoring the civilian emergency frequencies as the city tore itself apart. Davin was beside me, coordinating with PDF units that were increasingly overrun or simply stopped responding. Kane drank his cleaning solution and stared at nothing. Lyran had been sent to help with crowd control in sub-level 23. We never heard from him again. The civilian frequencies were chaos. Thousands of voices overlapping, pleading for help, reporting family members crushed in stampedes, describing the sounds they could hear from the upper levels, booming impacts, the screech of tearing metal, sounds like laughter but wrong, too deep, too hungry. Shelter 47. Tertius was in our sector, a reinforced bunker 3 levels below our station, designed to hold 5,000 people. By the time the doors sealed, there were 11,000 packed inside. I could hear them on the emergency frequency. Crying children, people praying, someone screaming that they couldn't breathe in the crush of bodies. The shelter had its own Vox transmitter. Standard protocol. Maintain contact with PDF command. Broadcast location to Imperial Rescue Forces. The frequency was monitored automatically, everything recorded for post-incident analysis. I was monitoring 7 shelters simultaneously when the first one went dark. Shelter 23, Primus. One moment I heard voices. An administrator trying to organize the crowd, someone leading a prayer recitation. The next moment, silence. Not static. Silence, like someone had simply turned off the transmission. Then it came back. But the voices were different, guttural, laughing, speaking in that same language I'd heard on the fragmentary reports, words that sounded like weapons impacting flesh. Orcs. They'd broken into the shelter. What followed lasted 14 minutes. I should have shut off the frequency. Should have stopped listening, but it was my job to monitor, to record, to bear witness. So I listened to 11,000 people die, listened to them scream and beg and pray to an emperor that didn't answer. Listened to the sounds of bodies being torn apart. Listened to the laughter. When it was over, there was silence again. Then a voice, crude and thick with accent, speaking low Gothic. "Dayumis is good fighting? Send more." The transmission cut. That's when I realized this was going to happen to every shelter, every single one, and there was nothing I could do except record it. Shelter 47 Tertius was my sector, my responsibility. 11,000 people I'd been trained to protect. I warned them, broke protocol, and used the emergency frequency to tell them what was happening to the other shelters. Told them the orcs were coming. Told them to barricade the doors, organize defenses, prepare for the worst. The shelter administrator, a man named Joran Harth, administratum clerk, 43 years old, responded with a kind of bureaucratic calm that only someone drowning in denial could manage. Vox operator Vex, your transmission contradicts official protocols. The shelters are secure. Imperial reinforcement is en route. The Emperor protects those who maintain faith and order. Please restrict communications to authorized. There is no reinforcement, I shouted into the Vox. Beside me, Davin grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back, but I couldn't stop. The orcs are slaughtering everyone. They're breaking into the shelters and killing everyone inside. You need to prepare. This transmission is causing panic among the civilians, Harth replied, his voice tight. I'm filing a formal complaint with PDF command for... The sound of impacts cut him off. Distant but clear through the Vox. Massive fists hammering against ferrocrete and plasteel. The sound of something incredibly strong trying to break through something that wasn't strong enough. What was that? Someone asked in the background. A young voice, frightened. Just the ventilation systems, Harth said, still clinging to procedure. Everyone remain calm. We're perfectly safe. The Emperor. More impacts. Closer now. Accompanied by that laughter, the sound that wasn't quite laughter, that was too eager, too hungry for violence. They're at the doors, someone screamed. Everyone back from the entrance, another voice commanded, deeper, authoritative. Anyone with weapons, form up. Anyone with military training, with me. That voice belonged to Marcus Vane, former PDF trooper, medically discharged after losing 2 fingers to a factory accident. 41 years old, father of 3 sons, husband to... No, all male. Change it. That voice belonged to Marcus Vane, former PDF trooper, medically discharged after losing 2 fingers to a factory accident. 41 years old, father to his younger brother, Petron, and guardian to his 2 nephews, Jacob and Fen, after their father died in a transit tunnel collapse. I knew Marcus. He'd served in my father's PDF unit, had attended Gregor Vex's memorial service, had told me that my father died believing his work mattered. Now I was listening to Marcus trying to organize a defense with maybe 30 people who had any combat training at all against something that had torn through reinforced blast doors like they were paper. Cassian, Davin said quietly. His hand was still on my arm. You can't save them. I have to try, I said. You're recording, aren't you? He looked at the equipment, at the spinning data crystal that captured every transmission. That's all we can do now, record, so someone knows what happened here. He was right. Command had stopped responding hours ago. The tactical net was dead. We were alone in our station, monitoring the death of our world with no ability to change it. But we could witness. We could record. So I activated the long-term storage protocols, set the Vox recorders to capture everything on all civilian frequencies. If we died, when we died, at least there'd be evidence. Proof that Boros Tertius existed, that 8 billion people fought and died here, that we mattered, even if only as a warning. The impacts on Shelter 47 Tertius's doors stopped. For 17 seconds, there was silence. Then the sound of tearing metal, not cutting, tearing, as something ripped through plasteel blast doors rated to withstand orbital bombardment. And the screaming began. The first voice I heard die belonged to a child, not a scream. Children screamed constantly in that first hour. This was different. A small voice, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, asking, "Papa, what's happening?" Then a sound like wet meat hitting stone and silence. I wanted to shut it off. My hand moved toward the Vox controls. Davin caught my wrist. "Don't," he said. "If you stop listening, they die alone." So I listened. The orcs came through the breach in the doors like a green avalanche. I couldn't see them, only audio. The Vox pickups in the shelter never meant for visual recording. But I could hear them, the heavy thud of massive feet on ferrocrete, the clank and rattle of crude armor, the revving of chain blades and the mechanical stutter of what must have been their weapons. Sluggers, I'd later learn they were called. And the laughter. Always the laughter. Marcus Vane's improvised defense lasted 43 seconds. I heard him shouting orders, heard the snap-crack of laser guns firing on full auto, heard someone screaming coordinates like they were back in PDF basic training. Then the sound of bodies impacting walls with enough force to break bones, the wet tearing sound of flesh giving way, and that laughter growing louder. Fall back to the second level. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The shelter was one large chamber with a few side rooms for supplies and sanitation. 11,000 people pressed into a space meant for 5,000, with nowhere to run. The orcs didn't just kill. They played. I heard it in their voices. The crude Gothic interspersed with their own language, the joy they took in what they were doing. To them, this wasn't warfare. It was entertainment. "This one's still kicking. Throw him at Dauvas." "How many can I get with one chop?" The sounds that followed answered that question. I counted 6 distinct screams that cut off simultaneously. The recording equipment captured everything in perfect clarity. Every bone breaking, every body hitting the ground, every prayer that went unanswered. And there were so many prayers. "Emperor, protect us," someone chanted, over and over, until their voice was cut off by something I didn't want to imagine. "Golden throne, preserve your servants," an old man's voice intoned, leading a group in the litany of protection. They made it through 3 verses before the chopping sounds interrupted. "In his name, we find sanctuary," another voice whispered, young, maybe 15. "In his light, we find—" The transmission from that Vox pickup cut to static. Later, I understood. The pickup had been destroyed along with whoever was carrying it. I sat in my station, my hands locked around the edge of the console, listening to faith fail. Listening to every promise the Imperium had made, that the Emperor protects, that prayer brings salvation, that service has meaning, being proven false in the most brutal way possible. They told us he protects, but no protection came. Only death. "Cassian," Davin's voice was quiet. "Your hands." I looked down. My fingers had gone white from gripping the console. When I released them, the metal edge had left deep grooves in my palms. I couldn't feel the pain. "We should go," Davin said. "Command's dead. The hives are falling. We should try to—" "To what?" I asked. "Escape. To where?" "The entire planet is being overrun." "Then we die trying instead of sitting here listening to—" "Someone has to witness," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Someone has to record this. So it means something. So they didn't die unwitnessed. They're dying either way. But this way, someone will know. The Imperium will recover the recordings eventually. They'll hear what happened. They'll use it as propaganda," Davin interrupted. He was staring at me like I was a stranger. "That's what you think," that the Imperium will care. They'll just use it to motivate the next batch of soldiers. Fight harder or end up like Boros Tertius. These people's deaths will be a threat, not a tragedy. He was right. I knew he was right, but I couldn't stop. Because if I stopped recording, if I shut off the Vox receivers, then I'd have to acknowledge I was listening to 11,000 people die and doing nothing. At least recording was something, even if it was meaningless. The slaughter in shelter. 47 Tertius's main chamber took approximately 47 minutes. 47 minutes of screaming and butchery and laughter. 47 minutes of people trying to fight with improvised weapons against creatures who treated violence like a game. 47 minutes of prayers going unanswered while faith crumbled. Then the sounds changed. The orcs had cleared the main chamber. Now they were hunting. 11,000 people had become maybe 2,000, the ones who'd hidden in the side rooms, barricaded themselves in supply closets, crawled into ventilation ducts. The ones still alive. The orcs found them one by one. I heard a man's voice, older, hoarse from screaming, trying to keep quiet in what must have been a supply room. His breathing was ragged, terrified. Through the Vox pickup I could hear him praying in whispers. "Emperor, if you hear your servant, grant me courage, grant me the strength to—" The door tore open with a shriek of metal. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. "Found a Nova." An orc voice, thick with anticipation. "Please," the man begged. "Please, I have a son. I have more Yumis to find." The man's screaming lasted 19 seconds. Then silence. Then the sound of the orc moving on, whistling, actually whistling, something that might have been a tune if violence could have melody. They were enjoying this. Every moment, every kill. To them, this was the purest expression of purpose. They'd been created for war, and now they were fulfilling that purpose with absolute enthusiasm. I envied them in that moment. Envied their certainty, their joy in what they were meant to do. We'd been told humans were meant to serve, told our suffering had meaning, our faith had value, our deaths would matter. But the orcs knew what they were without needing lies to comfort them. They were killers, and killing made them happy. While we died begging for a protection that never came. Inside room 7, I heard 3 voices. An adult and 2 children. The adult, Marcus Vane's voice, I recognized it, was trying to keep his nephews quiet. "Jakob, Then, listen to me," Marcus whispered. His voice was steady despite the sounds of orcs tearing through the nearby rooms. "You need to be completely silent. Don't move. Don't cry. Don't even breathe loudly." "Uncle Marcus, I'm scared," one of the boys whispered back. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. "I know, but the Emperor protects the brave, remember. Can you be brave for me?" The conditioning even worked on children, teaching them to believe courage would save them, that faith had power beyond psychological comfort. It was a lie. Marcus knew it was a lie. I could hear it in his voice, but he told it anyway because what else could he say? "We're going to die screaming and there's nothing after." You don't tell that to children, even when it's true. The door exploded inward. "More Yumis, little ones." "No!" Marcus's voice shifted to a roar. "Run, run now!" I heard the children scrambling, heard Marcus meeting the orc with something, maybe a metal bar, maybe a broken pipe, heard the impact of improvised weapon on orc flesh, heard the orc's grunt of surprise. "This one's got some fight." The sounds of struggle lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then a wet crunch, and Marcuse's voice cut off. But the children had gotten out. I tracked them on the Vox pickups as they ran through the shelter's corridors, their small feet pattering on blood-slicked ferrocrete. They were crying, calling for their uncle, calling for their dead father, calling for the Emperor. They made it 17 meters before another orc found them. I won't describe what I heard next. Some sounds are too specific, too detailed, too clearly the death of innocents. When it was over, one of the orcs said, "Tiny Yumis don't last long, boring," and moved on to find something more entertaining to kill. I sat at my station, staring at the Vox console, and felt something break inside me. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just a quiet snap, like a cable under too much tension finally giving way. Those children died believing the Emperor watched over them, died with prayers on their lips, died thinking their faith mattered. It didn't. It never had. The Emperor, if he even existed beyond the corpse on the golden throne, didn't care about 2 children in a shelter on a hive world 90,000 light-years from Terra. The prayers were programming, the faith was control, the promises were lies. And I'd helped perpetuate those lies. Every time I'd repeated the Imperial Creed, every time I'd told someone the Emperor protects, every time I'd recited the litanies, I was complicit. Cassian, Davin's hand on my shoulder, his voice careful. "Your nose is bleeding." I touched my face. My fingers came away red. The stress, probably. Or maybe something was wrong with the air recycling. Didn't matter. "We need to keep recording," I said. "There's almost no one left," Davin said quietly. "The shelter's gone silent." He was right. The screaming had stopped. The sounds of butchery had faded. All I heard was the heavy tread of orcs moving through the corridors, the occasional laugh, the creak and groan of damaged structure. Then, "Oi, found a Vox Fing." My blood went cold. They'd found the shelter's main transmitter, the device broadcasting everything to my station, if they destroyed it. But they didn't destroy it. Instead, I heard one of them pick it up, the sound of metal scraping against armor. Then a voice, speaking directly into the transmitter, crude Gothic but understandable. "Umi listenin'? You hear all dat? Dat was a good fight. Send more Umis. We's ready." Then laughter. Multiple voices. A chorus of violence, satisfied, but still hungry. The transmission continued, but there were no more screams, no more prayers, just orc voices discussing where to go next, which hive looked like it had the most fights, whether the Umis had anything good to loot. They left the transmitter running, deliberately, wanted whoever was listening to hear them, wanted us to know they were coming. "We need to leave," Davin said. "Cassian, we need to leave right now." "The recording's not complete," I said. "I need to. The shelter is dead," Davin shouted. He grabbed my shoulders, forced me to look at him. "Everyone's dead. You can't save them by recording. All you're doing is torturing yourself." "Someone has to witness," I repeated. It had become my mantra, my purpose, the only thing holding me together. "Then witness from somewhere else." Davin's eyes were wide, desperate. "Please, brother. Please, I can't lose you too." I looked at him, saw the fear, the love, the desperation of a younger brother who'd already lost his father and couldn't bear to lose his sibling too. I should have agreed. Should have abandoned the station, taken the recordings, fled into the hive's depths. Maybe we could have survived. but I didn't move. Because something had changed in me. The break-in I'd felt earlier wasn't an ending. It was a transformation, a fundamental shift in what I was. I was no longer Cassian Vex, PDF Vox operator. I was something else, a receiver, a witness, a living recorder of atrocity, and recorders don't run. They document. Go, I told Davin. Take the data crystals from the backup storage. Get as far away as you can. Maybe you can reach a shelter that's still intact. Maybe. I'm not leaving you. Davin, I'm not leaving you, he repeated. His jaw set in the same stubborn expression our father used to get. We're brothers. We survive together or die together. So we stayed. Together. Listening to the orcs move through shelter 47 Tertius. Listening to them celebrate their victory over 11,000 people who'd believed in protection that never came. Recording everything. Hour 3 was when I heard the singing, not orc voices. They'd moved on, searching for new prey. This was human, faint, coming from somewhere in the shelter's ruins. A single voice. Male. Young, singing something I didn't recognize at first. Not a hymn, not a military song. Something older, simpler. Sleep now, the dark is kind. Sleep now, the Emperor's watching. It was a lullaby, the kind you'd sing to a child. The kind my father used to sing to Davin when he was small, before exhaustion and factory shifts ground away that gentleness. The voice continued, ragged and broken, slurring words. Dream now, of stars so bright. Dream now, no fear tonight. Someone's alive, Devin said, leaning close to the Vox console. Who is that? I checked the pickup's location, side room 12, storage closet. I pulled up the shelter's roster, cross-referenced it with the registered occupants of that section. Resident, Thale, Yannick. Age, 19. Occupation, factory worker, shift 7. 19 years old. Same age as Private Lyron had been. Same age as countless factory workers and PDF troopers and HAB unit residents across the Hive. Old enough to work. Too young to have lived. Yannick Thale, I said into the Vox transmitter. Can you hear me? The singing stopped. Silence. Then, yes, who's there? Vox operator Cassian Vex, PDF Communications Hub 12. You're alive. I don't know, Yannick said. His voice was thick, slurred. Shock, probably. Or blood loss. I think I'm alive. I can't tell anymore. Are you injured? I don't know. There's blood, lots of blood. I'm not sure if it's mine. Yannick, listen to me. You need to stay quiet. The orcs might come back. If they hear you. I know. I heard what they did. I heard everything. His voice broke. I was hiding. There was a little boy hiding with me. Maybe 6 years old. He was crying, so I put my hand over his mouth, tried to keep him quiet. Yannick paused. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. I pressed too hard. He stopped moving. I killed him. I killed him trying to keep him safe. Yannick, you are trying to save him. I murdered a child. He said it flatly, stating a fact. His name was Corin. He told me before we hid. He was 6 years old and his name was Corin, and I suffocated him with my own hands because I was afraid of dying. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to comfort someone who'd crossed that line, who'd done what they thought was necessary and discovered the cost was their own humanity. The Emperor judges us by our intentions, I said, falling back on the conditioning, on the lies they'd taught us. You didn't mean... The Emperor doesn't judge anything, Yannick interrupted. His voice was calm now. Too calm. The Emperor's a corpse on a throne 90,000 light-years away. He doesn't see me, doesn't hear me, doesn't care that I murdered a child named Corin. That's heresy, I said reflexively. Is it? Where was his protection? Where was his divine intervention? I prayed while I hid, prayed for courage, for salvation, for someone to save us. Nothing answered. Just silence and death. He was right. Everything he said was true. But acknowledging it meant acknowledging that everything we'd been taught, everything our fathers had believed, everything we'd based our lives on, was a lie. Why were you singing? Davin asked quietly. Yannick laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. Because I'm going to die. Soon, I think. I can feel it. And I didn't want to die in silence. I wanted to be remembered as something other than the man who suffocated a child. You won't be forgotten, I said. I'm recording this. All of it. Your voice. Your testimony. When the Imperium recovers these recordings, they'll know you survived. Will they? Yannick asked. Or will they just hear another voice in the screaming, another data point in the casualty reports? We're already forgotten, operator. We were forgotten before we died. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that the Imperium valued its citizens, that our deaths mattered, that the recordings would serve as memorial and warning. But I was starting to understand. Yannick was right. These recordings would be filed, analyzed, and distributed as motivational material. The voices would become tools. The deaths would become threats. The horror would become propaganda. We were meat being processed into utility. Even our suffering would serve the machine. Keep recording, Yannick said. His voice was fading, growing distant. Maybe someday someone will listen and understand what we were. Not soldiers or servants or statistics. Just people. People who wanted to live. I'm recording everything, I promised. Good, that's good. He paused, then. Operator, Cassian, will you do something for me? Anything. Don't let them use our deaths to make others suffer. Don't let them turn our screaming into motivation. If you survive this, and I hope you don't for your sake, don't let them make what happened here mean something it doesn't. What do you want it to mean? I asked. Nothing, Yannick said. We died meaninglessly. Acknowledge that. Remember that. Don't dress it up in purpose or divine plan or necessary sacrifice. We were killed by green-skinned monsters while praying to a corpse god who never cared we existed. That's the truth. Record that truth. His breathing was getting shallower. I could hear it through the vox, wet, bubbling sounds. Internal injuries. Blood filling his lungs. I'm scared, he whispered. I'm 19 years old and I killed a child and I'm going to die alone in the dark and I'm so scared. You're not alone, I said. I'm here. I'm listening. Thank you. Another wet breath. Will you? Will you sing? I don't want the last thing I hear to be silence. So I sang. The same lullaby he'd been singing, the one my father sang to Davin. The one that promised safety and kindness and protection from the dark. All lies, but gentle lies. Comforting lies. Yannick's breathing stopped somewhere in the second verse. I finished the song anyway. For the recording. For the witness. For the 19-year-old factory worker who died believing his death was meaningless and being right. When I stopped singing, there was silence on the vox. Then, distant but clear, the sound of orcs returning to shelter 47 Tertius. The orcs returned because they'd left the transmitter running, broadcasting our location, drawing them back. I understood then. This wasn't an accident. They wanted whoever was listening to stay on the line, wanted us to hear what came next, wanted to spread the fear beyond just this shelter. Psychological warfare. From creatures we'd been taught were mindless brutes. The orcs weren't stupid. They were perfectly adapted to what they were. War incarnate, and part of war is breaking your enemy's will to fight. "We need to shut down the transmitter," Davin said urgently. "If they're tracking it, we're leading them here." "Let them come," I said. "What?" "They're going to find us eventually. Every shelter is falling. Every defensive position is being overrun. We're dead whether they track us or not." "So you want to just—" "I want to record everything," I interrupted. "Every voice, every death, every moment of what the Imperium's failure cost. When they find our bodies, they'll find the recordings. They'll hear what happened when protection failed." Davin stared at me. "You've gone insane." Maybe I had. Or maybe I'd finally achieved clarity. The mission had changed. I wasn't trying to coordinate defenses or save people anymore. I was documenting genocide, building an archive of Imperial failure, becoming complicit in the very system that had doomed us, but repurposing that complicity, turning the recordings into weapons, into accusations. Over the next hour, I monitored 43 more shelters, heard 43 more death rattles, heard the prayers and the screaming and the laughter, heard faith shatter again and again. And I recorded all of it. Corporal Kane died in minute 32 of that hour. We found him slumped over his station, the cleaning solution he'd been drinking finally poisoning him beyond recovery. His last words, slurred and barely coherent. "Better this than the greenskins." We left him where he fell. No time for ceremony. The orcs were 3 levels above us and descending. Davin tried one more time to convince me to run. We could take the data crystals and head for the sub-levels, maybe hide in the deep foundries, maybe live long enough to die slower. I shook my head. No, this is what I was meant to do: record, witness, make sure they're remembered. "They won't be remembered," Davin shouted. "The Imperium will file this away and forget. We're just numbers to them." "Then let me be a number that screamed the truth," I said. Davin looked at me with something like pity or horror. Then he sat down at his station and put on his headset. "Then I'll help," he said quietly. We witnessed together. So we spent our last hour listening to our world die. 2 brothers in a communications hub, surrounded by the voices of the dead, recording the evidence of Imperial abandonment. The orcs reached our level in minute 57. We heard them coming, the thunder of heavy footsteps, the crash of doors being torn from their frames, the laughter echoing through the corridors. "I'm sorry," I said to Davin. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." "You gave me purpose," Davin replied. He was crying, but his hands were steady on the controls. Father died believing his work mattered. We'll die knowing ours does. That's better, isn't it? I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think our recordings would serve as memorial, as warning, as indictment. But I was starting to understand. The Imperium would repurpose our horror into utility. Our suffering would become motivation. Our deaths would become propaganda. We'd document genocide, and they'd use it as a recruitment tool. The door to our station exploded inward. 3 orcs filled the doorway, massive, brutal, grinning with tusked mouths. Their armor was painted in crude symbols, their weapons were slick with blood. They looked at us. We looked at them. Then one of them saw the recording equipment, saw the spinning data crystals, understood in its primitive way what we were doing. It laughed. "Yumi's recording. Good, let him hear." It moved toward us with terrifying speed. I barely had time to slap the emergency protocols, sealing the data crystals, activating the transmission burst that would send copies to every PDF frequency that still existed. Then massive hands grabbed me, lifted me like I weighed nothing, and I didn't die. The orcs broke my body, every bone in my left arm, 3 ribs, my jaw. But they didn't kill me. One of them found it amusing to leave me alive, tossed me into a corner of the station like discarded garbage. I watched them kill Davin, watched them tear apart my brother while he screamed, watched them destroy our equipment, ruin our station, and move on to find more prey. I lay in the corner, broken and unable to move, and listened to the Vox transmitters die one by one as the shelters fell silent. The Imperial Guard arrived 6 days later. Not rescue, reclamation. Boros Tertius was dead. 8 billion people reduced to corpses and rubble. The Guard's mission was to secure whatever resources remained and purge the Orc presence. They found me in the ruins of Communications Hub 12, still alive through sheer biological stubbornness. They found the data crystals sealed in emergency storage. They recovered the recordings. 3 hours and 17 minutes of shelter, 47 Tertius's death, plus fragments from 42 other shelters, plus Yannick Thale's confession, plus my brother's last words before the orcs took him, all of it preserved in perfect clarity. The Departamento Munitorum analyzed the recordings for intelligence value. The Commissariat reviewed them for psychological warfare potential. The Administratum filed them under motivational material for frontline personnel. They designated the primary recording as VOX 44 Tertius and distributed it to Imperial Guard regiments across 3 sectors, played it for soldiers before deployment to remind them what they were fighting for, what happened when they failed. They turned my world's extinction into propaganda, and I lived. 42 years I've lived. Been transferred from regiment to regiment as a specialist consultant. The man who recorded Boros Tertius. The man who heard it all and survived. They rebuilt my body. Augmetics for the shattered bones. Cranial implants to help process trauma. Neural conditioning to prevent psychological collapse. But they couldn't fix what broke deeper than bone. Couldn't repair the part of me that died in that communications hub. I hear the recordings constantly. Not externally. They're not playing on Vox systems. They're playing in my mind. The neural conditioning that was supposed to help me process trauma instead carved those 3 hours and 17 minutes into my brain's architecture. Made them permanent, inescapable. Every scream, every prayer, every moment of Yannick Thale's confession, every second of my brother's death. On loop, forever. I tried to die 17 times in the first decade. Hanging, poisoning, walking into enemy fire. They stopped me every time. Rebuilt me every time. Told me I was too valuable, too useful as a symbol. The man who witnessed hell and survived to warn others. But I'm not warning anyone. I'm just perpetuating the cycle. Every time they play those recordings for new soldiers, they're not honoring the dead. They're using corpses as motivation, turning suffering into utility. I'm complicit, just like I was when I recorded instead of fighting. when I documented instead of dying, when I chose to witness rather than act. The recordings were supposed to be memorial. Instead, they're tools of oppression. The Imperium took 8 billion deaths and weaponized them, and I handed them the weapon. Today I'm sitting in a briefing room on Cadia's moon. Not Cadia itself. That's gone now, shattered by chaos. But the moon remains, converted into a training facility for new guard regiments. 20,000 recruits packed into barracks and drill yards, being conditioned into soldiers. I'm here because the commissariat requested me. They want me to speak to the recruits before their deployment, to tell them about Boros Tertius, to make the recordings personal. The commissar introducing me is named Horvald Kren, 47 years old, 3 decades of service, more medals than humanity. He looks at me with professional sympathy that doesn't reach his eyes. The recruits need to understand what they're fighting for, he says. What happens when we fail? Your testimony will provide context for the recordings. You mean it'll make them more frightened, I say. Fear is a weapon when properly directed, Kren replies. These men will be deployed to Armageddon next week. They'll face orcs in conditions similar to Boros Tertius. Your experience will prepare them. Nothing prepares you for that. Then they'll die informed instead of ignorant. That's something. The recruits file into the briefing hall. 20,000 men, most between 18 and 25, drawn from a dozen different Hive worlds. They're young, frightened, trying to hide both behind the conditioning they've received. They've been taught the Emperor protects, that courage and faith will sustain them, that their service has meaning, all lies but necessary lies. Because without them, the Imperium collapses. I should tell them the truth, should explain that the Emperor is a corpse, that faith is control, that their deaths will be processed into propaganda, should give them the gift of clarity before they die. But I don't, because clarity doesn't save them, it just makes the dying harder. Instead, I tell them about Boros Tertius, about 8 billion people who believed they were protected, about shelters that became tombs, about prayers that went unanswered while faith shattered. I tell them about Yannick Thiel, 19 years old, who died believing his death was meaningless and being right. I tell them about my brother, Davin Vex, who died so the recordings would survive. Then I play them VOX 44 Tertius, the full 3 hours and 17 minutes. I make them listen to every scream, every prayer, every moment of shelter 47 Tertius's death. When it's over, the briefing hall is silent. Some of the recruits are crying, others are staring at nothing. A few look angry, good anger, directed at the enemy. That's what Commissar Kren wanted. Anger they can use, fear they can weaponize, motivation drawn from horror. That, Kren says, his voice amplified across the hall, is what happens when you fail, when you break, when you retreat. The Emperor gave humanity the tools to fight. He gave you courage and faith and purpose. Honor those gifts by succeeding where Boros Tertius failed. More lies. But the recruits nod. Accept them, believe them, because what else can they do? After the briefing, one of the recruits approaches me. Barely 18, hive pale, eyes too wide. He reminds me of myself 42 years ago. Sir? His voice is small. Did anyone from Boros Tertius survive? 473 people, I tell him, out of 8 billion. The Imperial Guard evacuated them during the reclamation. But you survived. You witnessed it all and survived. Yes. How? He's desperate for an answer, for some secret to surviving hell. I didn't try to survive, I say. I just focused on the mission. Record everything, witness everything. Purpose kept me alive when I should have died. So if I focus on my duty, you'll die anyway, I interrupt. Purpose doesn't make you immortal. It just gives you something to think about besides fear. His face falls. He'd wanted comfort, wanted to believe courage and faith would protect him. But record it, I add. Whatever you experience, whatever you see, if you can, leave a record, so someone knows what happened, so you're remembered. He nods slowly, then asks the question I've been dreading. Do you think the Emperor heard them, the people in the shelter? Do you think their prayers reached him? I should lie, should reinforce the faith, should tell him yes, the Emperor heard them, their suffering had meaning. Instead, I tell the truth. The Emperor is a corpse on a golden throne, kept alive by machinery and the sacrifice of 10,000 psychers every day. He doesn't hear individual prayers. He doesn't see individual suffering. He's a symbol, not a savior. A story we tell ourselves to make the horror bearable. The recruit's eyes widen. That's heresy. Yes, I agree. But it's true. You asked if the Emperor heard them. I'm telling you, no. He didn't. They died unheard, just like you'll die unheard. Then why fight? His voice is breaking. If it's all meaningless, if faith is a lie, if we're just going to die. Because the orcs don't need meaning, I say. They'll kill you whether your death has purpose or not. So you might as well kill them back. Not for the Emperor, not for the Imperium, for the simple fact that they're trying to kill you and you'd rather they didn't. It's the coldest honesty I can offer. The only truth that might keep him alive a few minutes longer. He stares at me like I've shattered his world. Maybe I have. Maybe that's cruel. But lies are crueler. Let him go to Armageddon with clarity, even if it's despairing clarity. He walks away without another word. I watch 20,000 recruits file out of the briefing hall, carrying the recordings with them, carrying the voices of the dead, carrying my complicity forward. The cycle continues. 42 years of listening, 42 years of witnessing, 42 years of surviving. I understand now what I've become. I'm not a man anymore. I'm an archive, a living repository of suffering. The Imperium took my recordings and turned them into weapons, and they took me and turned me into the weapons explanation. I am the proof that hell exists, that the Emperor's protection fails, that faith is insufficient against violence. I am the walking reminder that humanity is meat and the universe is full of predators. But I'm also more than that. I'm evidence of the Imperium's crime. They sent 8 billion people to Boros Tertius, knowing it was defenseless, knowing rescue was unlikely, knowing the death worlds of the sector were underprotected and overpopulated. They filled the Hive worlds past capacity, squeezed them for resources, and when the inevitable invasion came, they let us die. Not because they couldn't save us. Because saving us was less efficient than letting us die and using our deaths as propaganda. The recordings prove it. 3 hours and 17 minutes of Imperial citizens being slaughtered while praying to a god that didn't answer, while believing in protection that never came, while maintaining faith in a system that viewed them as expendable. And what did the Imperium do with that evidence? Filed it under motivational material. They took our genocide and turned it into a recruitment tool. That's the truth about the Imperium I've learned. Everything is utility. Every death serves a purpose. Every horror becomes a weapon. There's no waste in the machine, only processing. The Emperor they taught us to worship is a corpse sustained by sacrifice. A tyrant who consumed entire species and called it compliance. A false god whose only miracle is the machinery that keeps him from rotting. The protection they promise is propaganda. The divine plan is administrative efficiency. The meaning they assign to suffering is psychological control to prevent rebellion. And I'm complicit. Because I recorded. Because I witnessed. Because I survived to tell the story they wanted told. Fight harder or end up like Boris Tertius. I handed them the weapon they're using to motivate 20,000 recruits to die on Armageddon. But maybe, just maybe, the recordings contain something else. Something the Imperium can't edit out or repurpose. The truth of their failure. Yannick Thal's voice saying, "The Emperor's a corpse. He doesn't see me, doesn't hear me, doesn't care." My brother's voice, screaming as the orcs tore him apart while the Emperor watched and did nothing. 11,000 voices praying desperately, faithfully, uselessly. Maybe someday someone will listen and understand. This is what the Imperium does. It grinds humans into components. It dresses up slaughter in purpose. It calls suffering service and exploitation duty. Maybe the recordings will become evidence instead of propaganda. Maybe someone will hear them and rebel. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm just another tool maintaining the machine that created me. Maybe my hope that the truth will eventually matter is just another lie I'm telling myself to survive. But I keep recording. 42 years later, I still document. I still witness. Because if I stop, then the voices stop too. And at least while I remember them, they're not completely gone. At least while I scream their names into the void, they're not completely erased. It's not redemption, it's not meaning, it's just continuation. The archive of suffering, preserved in living flesh, waiting for someone to finally listen. My name is Cassian Vex, and I have been listening to the same 3 hours and 17 minutes for 42 years. Tonight I sit in my quarters on Cadia's moon, alone, staring at the Vox receiver on my desk. The official one provided by the Commissariat. The one I'm supposed to use to review the recordings before presentations. But I don't need to play them. They're already playing. Always playing. In the architecture of my brain, in the neural pathways the Imperium's conditioning carved, in the meat that won't let me forget. I hear Yannick Thal singing his lullaby. I hear my brother's last scream. I hear 11,000 voices crying out for protection that never came. I hear the orcs laughing, and I will hear them tomorrow. And the day after, and every day until my body finally fails, and even the Imperium's augmetics can't sustain me anymore. I tried to die 17 times. They stopped me 17 times, said I was too valuable. But they were wrong. I'm not valuable. I'm just useful. A tool that serves its function, remind soldiers what happens when they fail. Perpetuate the cycle, feed the machine, turn suffering into utility. I am complicit in my own exploitation. I'm the weapon I forged. I am the archive that documents its own meaninglessness. Tomorrow I'll brief another regiment. Play them the recordings. Watch their faces break as they realize how little their lives matter. Watch them accept the lies anyway, because the alternative is accepting that their deaths are waste, not sacrifice. And the cycle will continue. The voices will continue. The screaming will continue. Forever. On my desk, next to the Vox receiver, sits a data crystal, a personal recording I made last week. My testimony, my confession, everything I understand about what the Imperium did to Boros Tertius, what they did to me, what they're doing to every world, every soldier, every citizen, the truth they don't want told. I'll never transmit it, never share it. The commissars would execute me for heresy, and the recordings would die with me. But it exists. One small piece of evidence that someone understood. Someone witnessed. Someone screamed the truth even if no one heard. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe it's just another lie I'm telling myself. The Vox receiver crackles with static. For a moment, just a moment, I imagine I hear something in the noise. A voice. Calling my name. But it's just interference. Just my brain processing random signals into patterns. Trying to find meaning in chaos. There is no meaning. There never was. There's just the recording, the loop, the eternal witness to suffering that never ends. My name is Cassian Vex. I was 27 years old when my world died. I'm 69 years old now, and I have been screaming for 42 years. And tomorrow I will press play, and the cycle will continue. Always.